Mr. Maynard Meguiar has been a good friend over the years as far as I'm concerned. He's known a lot of people. He's seen a lot of things come to pass in the Portland area. We'll see a lot more over the next several years. He's a man that I always enjoy sharing stories with, sitting and talking to, visiting with, and you always can have a good visit with him. And that's exactly what we're going to do here today, Mr. Meguiar. Mr. Maynard Meguiar, and let's go back now. What were we talking about? Before we went on in camp, we were just talking about the beginnings of the Meguiar family. And when I look in the phone book for Meguiar, I don't look for M-E-G, I look for M-C or M-A-C. What's the history of the name Meguiar, as you spell it?
Well, in Ireland, I think it was really an Irish name. It is M-A-C-W-Y-R-E, Meguiar. And I'll just relate this on the story. Someone told it, maybe I shouldn't tell it, but said the Meguiars got the bootlegging in Ireland. And some of them, they left and went to England, and some went to France. And my group went to France, and M-E-G-U-I-A-R is the French spelling of Meguiar.
They've been drinking that Irish whiskey they were making, that's what
well, that's true or not, I don't know, but it is kind of like with the family history, the tree. I never have gone too far in that because some of them told me that my ancestors went back to Jesse James. And I thought, I don't know of anybody that's any more well-known than Jesse James. I'm just going to stop right there.
Okay, about what period of time did the Meguiars settle in the Upper Sumner area, Portland area?
Well, I really don't know the year, but I used to would talk to old people. My grandfather was a missionary Baptist preacher, and I would talk to people who knew him. And he died in 1908, and several places around here, and at Benjamin, he used to live in Benjamin, and he preached this entire area. But Dad said he tried to be a Baptist and couldn't, and I never did even try. So that's the history of that part of it.
All right, now when you settled and you started, you went to school, what did you do in a period of time during the Depression? Did you start farming at the time? Did you get into business? What did you set your goals to be, Maynard Meguiar's goals?
Well, let's start with 1908.
All right, sir.
Or 7. Let's start with 1907.
Okay.
And my father bought a farm. We lived down on White Oak Branch. We lived on one side. Elmer Hinton and his family lived on the other side.
Right.
The Hintons and the Garretts and the Kennedys all lived in that entire area. We were kind of, had moved in there, and we were kind of as outlaws being in there among those others, but that is where we were living when I was born. And my father bought a farm out here on Fallaford Road, where Joe, whatever his name is, can't think of his name now. Anyway, it's about 2 miles out on Fallaford Road. And we couldn't get possession of the farm right then, and we had to move in a tenant house belonging to my grandmother, back of her house, and we lived there a year. And I started school at White Oak, my sister and I did. And I remember the first day that I went, we had to go through the woods, and we ran into a hornet's nest. And one stung me in the forehead, and I didn't go back to school anymore.
Almost put a group in your school.
My sister went on, but I didn't. There's some people living there. Ellis Hinton out here in this Highland Terrace. He was one of the students.
Where was White Oak School located?
Well, from the crossroads out from Portland here, going toward Benchville, it was about halfway. It was across White Oak Branch. There was a swinging bridge, and we could walk across White Oak Branch. In fact, there was what they call a sulfur gum there. I've never heard of another sulfur gum, but it was just a wood box, and you could dip down there with some of the best sulfur water you ever drank. And all toward Mitchellville, this White Oak Schoolhouse was on the left, a side road that went, came back toward Clarence Halls and that area there. And I imagine that most of those, Mr. Henry Staggs was the teacher at the time. But the next year then we moved to Portland, and I started the school. My sister and I, my older sister and I, started school in Darcy's. That is out back of where Johnny Legg lived, out from Portland. In fact, there wasn't any such thing as Highway 52 then. And they called that road from out toward the state line all through Portland, and Fowler Ford Road, and you went on out there some distance and turned left and crossed what is now 52, then came back and crossed 52 again, and went down through, there was 3 or 4 houses down there, and you crossed the creek. There wasn't any bridge.
Right.
You just crossed it. And I remember my father, the whole family, we were in this 2-horse wagon. We went across there one time, and the creek was up, and the mules had to start to swim it. And the back of the wagon started down the creek. But if anyone ever got scared, no one went on. We just went on across the creek.
Okay, did you start working on a farm, then you went to school?
Yeah, after we, that was the first year, and then the next year we came to school in Portland, my sister and I did, and it was the old Portland Seminary. The old school was where the Baptist Church now stands, and Professor Kerr was the principal. Practically every person who went to school there at that time is dead. There are very few living. I can't think of over 3 boys that are still living.
How long did you attend that school?
Well, the last year, of course, they moved over to the high school where Richland over here. Moved over there in 1915, but in 1914, excuse me, I went to school up stairs, what was then the Portland Path. Right. There was one grade that went to school in the morning, the other grade went to school there in the afternoon. But then in 1915, the entire school, high school, elementary, and all moved over to the new high school. Right. And these trees that are out here in front of this building, my father and Mr. George Cole, W.D. Cole's grandfather, set those trees. And that was, they set them, I guess, about 1915 or 16.
Okay, what did you do in the 20s now? The 20s was an interesting period of time. You were just beginning to go toward the Depression, yet you had some pretty good times in the early 20s for a while, following World War I. Well,
of course, I finished high school here in Portland in 1919, and then in the fall of 1919, I went to the University of Tennessee, and I was over there 4 years. Now, there were 2 of those years in high school that my present wife, Ellie, probably she was then, we dated for 2 years while we were in high school. And then, after I'd come home, we dated the 4 years I was in college, and we married the year that I finished school.
When did you start a farming operation on Fountainhead Road?
Well, actually, 2 different hitches. Pretty soon after my wife and I married, her father moved to Nashville, 801 Russell Street. And that's the area that's being rebuilt now. But that house has been torn down. And there was a short time there that we ran a grocery store right back of the house. And then we ran that a while, sold it out to someone else, and my father-in-law and I were 2 of the original directors of Loveless Candy Company. And we stayed in that for a while. It was just too sweet a line for me. And I got out of that. I wanted to go to the farm. Made up my mind I was leaving. Right. Well, my father-in-law decided that if I was going to leave, he would too. So he bought this farm out here where I'm living now in 1925. That was the year that the storm hit over there on the Dobbins Pike. I saw the cloud. I was getting my cow up in the pasture.
A lot of lives were lost
Oh,
throughout
yeah.
the neighborhood.
Of course, my wife's father
What's
was a doctor, and they called him over there to see what he could do to help those that were just injured. And I remember seeing that Ellison family laying there side by side, 8 of them, and they still had the expression of horror on their face that they had when the storm hit. I couldn't sleep for a month after that.
Back in 1925, 1930 now, about what time did you start farming on the farm, really?
Well, of course, I started farming that year, 1925. I farmed out there on that farm.
What were you raising on the farm at that time? What was your money crop?
Well, actually, wheat, hay, and corn. And that is when I started raising hogs.
Okay.
My first hogs, I bought some gills.
Where did strawberries come into the Portland scene? When and where?
Well, as far as I know, Mr. Pope McLaughlin was the first one that grew strawberries here. That is Hubert McLaughlin's father. And that was probably, he was growing strawberries probably when we moved to Portland in 1907, because he was paying 25 cents a day for picking. And at dinner time, he would give the pickers some strawberries to eat and enough sugar to put on to sweeten them. Then he began to pay 3 cents a gallon. But I never did pick any strawberries until they got to a nickel. And I started picking for Mr. Eugene McLaughlin when they were a nickel. But he didn't let me pick much. He had me keeping the crates to him and everything.
Well, strawberries at one time got to be a major problem here in this area.
Oh yeah, it was the largest strawberry shipping point in the United States at one time. Mr. Harbor was manager here at the Portland Strawberry Growers Association. I was a director at one time when he was manager, because I bought a house right across from the Methodist Church, my wife and I did, and we moved over there. And while we were over there, my wife's father, we moved to an old house where we lived now. He built a new house there in 1926. Then in 1927, I bought a farm up in Franklin and went up there and grew strawberries for 10 years. And my wife's father died in 1937. So we came back to Portland, and we've been here now 49 years.
Why did the strawberry money crop play out in the Upper Sumner, Portland area?
Well, really, I think the main thing was that compete against the Mexican berries. It got out here, they first, consigned berries. They would consign them maybe Cincinnati, Chicago, places like that, that you wouldn't hear from for 2 or 3 days. And I remember I was growing strawberries in Franklin while they were consigned. And I paid 37 cents for an empty crate. And the manager, I went in with a load of berries, the manager said, that last load of strawberries, we just got 35 cents a crate for 24 full quarts. Said, you better go home and tell them to quit. So I went home, I hollered out real loud, I said, don't pick another berry, we're through. That was in 1933.
Yeah.
That is the worst year that we've ever had, because it was that year, it wasn't how much you were making, but how much you were losing on anything you grew.
Right.
I told David Bradley one time over at Gallatin, he was from Commerce Union Bank, I said, Dave, I've told this so often, I believe it's true. I said, I used to go out to buy some pigs or shoats, and I'd buy them for $1, $1.50 a piece, they'd throw in the old sow. He said, Maynard said, I wasn't old enough, but I've been with my daddy when he did that.
Right. Let me ask you a question.
Cheap then.
That's right. Let me ask you a question now, Mr. Maynard Meguiar. What would you like to see Portland? Which direction would you like to see Portland go in the next 50 years?
Well,
are we on track? Are we on track now? What do you think?
Of course, Portland has become kind of like the Hawaiian Islands. It's become commercialized. See, there wasn't any industry at all. The shirt factory was the first industry of any kind that was here.
Right.
And I remember going up to Dr. Kelly and Franklin to have a tooth pulled and told him about he was getting the factory here. He said, Maynard said, you're making a mistake. Says, you won't be able to get any labor on the farm at all. Well, of course, it turned out that way.
All right, the next question, the final question for you. Now that I know how you would like to see Portland go in the next 50 years, how would you like for the people of Portland to remember Maynard Meguiar?
Well, there were just two things that I always wanted the people to have, and that was respect and confidence in me as a man.
That's a good goal to set for anybody. Mr. Maynard, thank you. Appreciate it so much.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Maynard Meguiar,
Glad to do it.
lifelong resident of Portland, Tennessee, we appreciate so much taking the time to be with us today. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.